Thank you for tuning in to the World Builder's Anvil, episode 206, Creating Great Characters.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, my name is Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And the stronger character of the two, I am Michael Miller.
Yes, the stronger character, because here, this is the show where if you're still listening after we told you to stop world building, we appreciate that.
And after you suffered through an entire pirate episode, which I'm still waiting to get feedback on that episode. I want to know what everybody thought of that.
And I think you saw that one too. There was only one response I think we saw on that so far. So
I don't think I saw that.
Actually, I don't know if they even brought up the voice, which blew my mind.
So yeah, guys, if there isn't any conversation on the Facebook group yet, I would love to hear what you guys thought of the pirate episode. And I apologize. I don't think I'll do that again for another 100, maybe 200 episodes. I know that must have been rough to listen to, but I had
at least not the whole episode.
Every now and then.
It was an amazing durability to the voice.
Yeah, my throat hurt at the end of it, but it was fun to do. I just thought it was just fun staying in the character, but it was funny because we got to the end of the episode and Jeff, like we were done recording it, and Jeff's like, I can't believe you didn't say "shiver me timbers," and I'm like, oh, I forgot to say that. And there was another one. There was like 2 or 3 phrases that I meant to stick in the episode, and I completely didn't get them in there. So, but like pirates, today we're talking about strong characters. We're talking about how to create them. So we're getting back to creating stuff on today's episode.
And I think sometimes people they lose track of character building in world building as a larger scope. And the thing is, ultimately, the thing that makes worlds awesome are the unique personalities that can show up based off of the variables you create for them in your cultures and all that stuff. And sometimes people who don't consider themselves world builders, because they prefer doing stuff like creating characters, that's wrong. Characters are part of the world. You know, they exist as they are because of the stimulus around them. And so I just kind of came up with 5 tips. I think that if you use these tips, you'll have really strong characters.
And I'm, of course, going to add my opinion as we go. But also, if you're not someone who's like creating characters per se, and you're just doing the world building aspect of it, if you go back a bunch of episodes, and if Jeff can find it, he'll put it in the show notes because he's so grand that way. Something for you guys to think if you're not writing stories and you're not creating characters like people, but you are just world building and you're creating cultures. If you go back to an episode that we did about creating cultures, one of the perspectives that we take when doing that is treat the entirety of the culture as a character. So
clever idea.
Some of this, yeah, Jeff gets credit for that one. So some of this stuff can be applied to the cultural scale, and especially, I wouldn't say just take all this and do that. I would say go back to that other episode, listen to that one also, and you can apply a lot of this to the entirety of a culture, a nation state, a city, or what have you. But we are specifically talking about individuals in this episode.
Yeah, most definitely. And what makes a good character and what makes a bad character, and I'm sure some ideas might come up of what makes bad characters, but we're not trying to make bad characters here, so we're going to skip on to the 5 tips or 5 steps to making great characters, because the first and most important thing is people need to identify with a great character. Not necessarily as a person or someone they even like, but the overall archetype. It needs to be something recognizable to people, because if they struggle trying to figure out the character and who he is, they will miss what makes him great. And sometimes they'll actually turn people off. So especially for main characters, there's a reason why there are archetypes. They're universal. People understand patterns. Our brains we're not great about specific details, but we're great with patterns. So when you can bring in the pattern of something that's familiar, a character archetype, which is the reason why, like, if you break genre norms, you can get in trouble as a writer. Sometimes you create a new genre, but other times people just go, that's garbage. And they struggle too much when they can't recognize patterns. And when you're doing something to share with other people, archetypes are essential as a backbone. It's sort of the backbone of the character. And I kind of like to think of them too, and we talk about this about writing for stories overall, it's sort of the mission statement of your character. If they are the evil mustache villain, it kind of gives you an idea of the things to keep in mind with them as you're using them. It gives you a direction for the character to take as you're progressing through storytelling and sharing the world.
And the thing with archetypes, like, they're archetypes for a reason. Like, they would not have developed to the point where they're almost cliche and easily recognizable if we didn't like them, if there wasn't something that worked with them. You've got, like, your Supermans, your Captain Americas, your Boy Scout style heroes, and then you've got the mustachio twirling villains that are just rotten to the core. I love some of the things that Joss Whedon has done, and over the course of his career with characters where you think a character is one thing, and then you find out there's something else. Yeah. Like, they fit into an archetype, and you think that this character is this thing, and the story rolls that way and it works that way, but then you find out there's something else.
And actually, Michael only picks Joss because he hasn't seen all of the work he's done, but he's a big fan of Justice League, the new movie out that Joss came in to wrap up.
I haven't actually seen Justice League yet.
I'm lying. I'm assuming you won't like it.
Really? Based on what I've seen, I don't expect to. I'm setting the bar really low for that.
Even though I'm sure there will be some great character moments within there because Joss got brought into the last minute to try and save it. Yeah. So some of the stuff that you're about to talk about that I interrupted you with will be in there. But really, just think Michael has seen it and liked it and go troll him somewhere.
The only thing that I expect to really like in that movie is The Flash. Like, I think... Well, and Wonder Woman. I think everything else is going to be annoying.
Okay, you can think that.
We'll see. Okay. Like I said, I haven't seen it yet.
I haven't seen it yet either, but from what I've heard, maybe. Put out a pattern. And I assume with number one here, you've got strong archetype. I assume that when you're talking about this, you're kind of considering not just like every single character, but maybe like your big characters, like your protagonist, your antagonist, and maybe some of the sub-boss characters. Yeah. Like Friend 3 at Bar doesn't get fleshed out quite as much. I'm talking about your important characters, the characters that are going to be in the book enough to where people are going to need to identify them. There's a guy I killed in book 1. Him and his friend were in book 1 for, I believe, 5 or 6 paragraphs. They're not really fleshed out at all.
So speaking of fleshed out here, on your list, number 2 is use quirks to add flavor and uniqueness and develop personality. These would be specific personality traits that are not super significant, but they're noticeable. They're something to add a little flavor to individualize a character and make them stand out from everybody else. Like maybe something little might be, something your character has. Like I forget what it was. There was some movie I saw not too long ago, and I want to believe that Forrest Whitaker did it of his own accord. I don't think it was part of the character, but throughout the entirety of the movie, he is carrying a chess piece, and every now and then he pulls it out and he'll put it down or he'll play with it in his hand.
So he gets a prop and a quirk with it. That's brilliant.
Yes, but they never say why. They never address it. It's never a thing. I don't know if it was part of the story originally. It was something that they created for the character, or if it's something that Forrest Whitaker came up with.
As the actor came up with.
As the actor came up with on his own. I want to believe that he did it on his own, but I don't know for sure.
And one of the things, and I actually, there'll be in the show notes the links. I found like someone will put out 1,000 character quirks. But and stuff like wears too much jewelry. That is a character quirk. It could even be sort of like really toned down versions, like that
the smoking man.
Like Jeffrey is very humble as a character quirk. Actually, no, that's really more of a advantage I have. But it's Jeffrey does self-deprecating
you're talking about
humor.
Yourself in the third person.
Does self-deprecating humor a lot. That is a character quirk of Jeffrey. So it's those little things that really take something from an archetype, but they give it people. We have these little things about us. It's the things our loved ones love and hate about us, probably. Because there's times where they're like, that is so cute, especially when they first get together. And then after, 5 or 6 years, it's like, could you stop doing that, Michael?
Well, Jeff, we haven't been together that long.
But, they're just, like you said, it's little things. And it could be like real things like paranoia, but it's not really to the level of actual mental illness paranoia. It's like paranoid traits where you have a tendency to be just suspicious of everything because it's going to affect you.
Or mild compulsive habits. Like
compulsive.
The guy's always pulling out
piece.
mints and chewing on mints, or he's constantly sharpening his sword. Like I had a character that was always sharpening his blades, like always, like compulsively and annoyingly so.
Or Yasad was dying. That was like his compulsive behavior.
Well, his compulsive behavior is praying. He was always praying. Yes. He was anxious most of the time and insufferably awkward. Yes. like so socially awkward.
Well, that was probably more of an actual rise to the level of being a disadvantage for him, more so than just a quirk.
True, but I also played him in a fashion where people liked him despite this. People felt for him, like there was great empathy for him, despite it possibly being an annoyance, his personality. But he was also a very thoughtful character. He never he was not selfish in any way. So.
Well, I think overall, when we get this idea of trite sort of trope characters, they end up being called when people get sick of the archetypes because they're so obvious. It's because what happens, I think, is we don't have those quirks, those details that really make them feel unique, make them feel their own. And to me, it's these quirks plus the archetype really helps form the basic personality. So I haven't been to motivations yet.
I know, this is like the big one. Number 3 is the real big one. I'm going to stay on quirks for another second, though. Like, can you think...
I did that on purpose, yeah.
Can you think of a couple specific characters that, like, you're watching a movie and you have a character that's relatively generic, but
Two-Face?
But the couple of... but he's not relatively generic.
He's not generic, but quirk-wise, it's fidgeting with the coin.
Yeah.
Which is a great quirk I could think of, which makes sense to him as a larger character too. To me, it's almost an afterthought quirk that got put in because it worked well with Two-Face. But it's a great quirk. I think a lot of fidgety stuff for quirks. Go ahead and finish your thought.
Well, I was going to say a character that you can think of that on the surface is a quick archetype. Like you see the character and they're an archetype character, but there are quirk things that make them stand out. I have an example. Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is like just, if you strip away like some of the quirks and what we know about him, he's just a generic hero adventurer.
Yep.
But that hat is an iconic thing about him. His hate for snakes, and the whip. No one uses a whip.
No one uses a whip.
Like, if you say, who uses a whip, you're like, Indiana Jones. Like, who else?
Not in the West, at least.
Couple of video game characters,
Martial artists, because whip fighting is really cool. I think a great quirk that really sort of I think helped define a character, but was not even essential at all actually to the character. Like you could have cut it out and it would have made no difference to the character. Was Gandalf and his pipe smoking.
Yep.
And especially was it just the movies? I don't believe it was just the movies, but the blowing of the literally magical smoke would come out in shapes and stuff like that. So I think that is one of the more interesting quirks out there. But yeah, it's just those things. It describes the behavior of your character. It doesn't necessarily affect their life, but it describes it describes how their personality manifests, and it
makes them stick out a little bit.
And for me, I use archetypes and quirks to really develop before I get into the next thing.
It's like your foundation.
Because I like the quirks as inspiration too for what are the number 3 here, which is the develop strong motivations. And I like to think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And there's a couple of reasons why, like scientifically, there are probably a little bit better ways and more complicated ways to go into this, but it's pretty basic. You have 3 levels: basic needs at the bottom, and then your psychological needs, and then self-actualization at the top.
You want to try that word again?
No, I screwed it up enough. Self-actualization.
There you go.
And so in each of these, you'd have and basic needs would be physiological and safety needs. And for me, I think all great characters' base motivations are at this level. They're either fulfilling some kind of safety need for the character or some kind of physiological need for the character. These are the strongest, most powerful motivations they have. They might come out in different ways. It's like my need for safety might lead me to form a militia to protect my town, and I'm known as the great guard captain of the town because I sit there, I take care of the people, but it's really my own need for that security that causes me to do that. And so that's really where, a basic need sort of comes out as a character through the archetype, through the quirks, is how it gets delivered.
I think the self-actualization is I want to pat you on the back. You can't say actualization. I can't I can't say a 4-letter word.
I'm really good at 4-letter words.
Yeah, I'll take the 13-syllable ones, but as soon as you cut me down to 4 letters, I have a difficult time. I want to pat you on the back for that one because that's a really intelligent observation where a mainstay of a character is how they come into being themselves as a personality, or like a defining moment in their lives where they are actualized. Like that is a smart thing. And sometimes that can be a big part of either their history or their becoming a character in the book.
And the way I like to think about that too is their self-actualization, where those needs are for them, that's what people think they are. Because that's typically the most surface type of things, but it's really behind there, those basic and psychological needs that are really driving this character through the way they have self-actualized. So it's a simple way to look at a personality, but to make sure you've well-rounded out a character to kind of cover, how does this character get his basic needs met? How does he get his psychological needs met? If he has holes, in any of those areas at any time, he's going to try and fill them. And the more basic it is, the more likely they are to really push for it. That's what causes, even good people to do bad things. Like if you don't have food, that basic physiological need, you are really going to go to extremes. Revolutions start in countries because enough people can't get food.
Do you want to move on to the next one, or you want to sit on this for a little bit?
I don't know if we have anything else here. Do you have anything else here?
Well, I don't know if I would call this... I don't know if I would put it under motivations, but I guess you got visualize and... Okay, I'm going to talk about it now just because it doesn't quite fall into motivations and it doesn't quite fall into quirks. It's somewhere in between. But I am a huge, and I've talked about this before, I am a huge proponent of creating a contradiction, especially in a main character, whether it be the hero or the villain or both. I'm a very big fan of whether they have a stand for something, something that they believe in and they stand behind and they represent, but there's also a direct contradiction to that that's built into their background, their story, or their future. So a really easy example of this is Batman. Batman really stands to not kill his enemies. He has done it, but he tends to be a big stand for not killing them. It's easy for me to say I don't kill people that I'm against, because I don't put myself in mortal danger and fight them and try to capture them. Batman does that every day. So he's got this huge contradiction that he constantly bumps up against. So when you create a character, people think, that doesn't make sense. You got this thing and you got that thing and they're contradictory. if you were to break down your personality in your life, you discover that you are loaded with contradictions. I've got tons of them. Most of them have to do with my opinions and my beliefs. And good characters, in my opinion, you're going to have at least one glaring contradiction that really makes it easy to create conflict in the character and in the story. And I'm a big fan of that being part of it, especially a main character.
I'm a big believer that in anything that's fleshed out, like a culture, and this is what we talked about a little bit earlier, how these rules, especially the way I think about things, kind of apply up and down the scale.
I got a real good cultural example in one of the Magic the Gathering books from the Lorwyn series. There is a whole culture, and it's an elven culture, and they're all about physical looks. Like it's super important that you look perfect.
Yeah.
And but they're also a warrior race, so they get scarred. And if you get scarred, or like they have horns, if their horn gets broken, it's like,
oh, man.
It's a huge thing. Like, you are ostracized from society. You cannot be upper crust society if you have a scar. And you definitely can't get into higher ranking things if you have a broken horn.
But you have to fight.
But these are common, but these are common. So there's a contradiction just in that. But the even bigger contradiction is that everyone on the higher end has all these things wrong with them, and they're using glamours. So no one looks right. Everyone has scars or poor features, or like a birth defect, or a broken horn. They're all using glamours, and they're like, oh, well, I'm the general. Of course I look perfect. It's like, how did this guy get to be general? All the fights he's been in, and he has no scars. It's because he's lying to everybody. But it's like this lie. Like, a lot of the upper crust knows that, but the lower crust doesn't. They're all like, oh, I got a scar on my arm from this battle. Now I can never rise above sergeant. That's it. So I thought that was great.
That's awesome.
A lot of people didn't like that book. Like that trilogy is really frowned upon in all of those books, and I loved that series. Like, I absolutely loved that series.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, is there are contradictions in life, and the thing is, unless you're building like a world where there's no conflicts, no problems, there's always going to be contradictions, in languages, there are no languages on earth that don't have irregular nouns, and they're just contradictions in the language. There are always these things that just don't make sense, and that's the beauty of life. That is the beauty of anecdote. That is just the way it needs to roll. So, contradictions, for me, and we talked about this before. We talked about building heroes. All my heroes typically, I think have great strengths and great flaws, and I think usually they mesh together, where they're either the yin and the yang of each other, or they're just different expressions of the same thing. Okay.
All right, you want to move on to number 4?
Let's go on to number 4. You need to be able to visualize your character in your head. And I have a couple rules I like to keep in mind as I go. And in life, this is what I've noticed. When I meet someone like Mike, I don't think of much.
Or Michael. Hey! You don't think of much. That hurts.
I was talking about Mike, not Michael.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. So this is fine. But Michael, I think, you meet Michael in real life, and you're like, hey, this guy, there's some things you're gonna notice about him when you first meet him. He's kind of short, pretty fat.
Wow. Okay.
Bad breath. And those are the 3 things I think of when I meet Michael.
Thanks. Thank you. Very nice. Excellent. When you see Jeff, you think, wow, ugly, unkempt. He clearly hasn't showered in a while, and boy, someone must have not dressed him this morning, because who picked out this outfit? So
his mom was out of town because he obviously dressed himself today.
There's your 3. There's your 3 quirks.
But it's there are things that you notice, and the problem is we're pattern people. So the most noticeable, the most outwardly facing things will be the things people notice first. But I think a mistake, and I know I made this a lot, and maybe it's just me, but when I first started trying to to deliver characters and stories, I wanted to share everything about them. Let me give you the written description, every piece of clothing, every stitch in the vest, every piece of food particulate in their mouth.
It's a lovely vest. It is.
It's a lovely vest because the food particles are on the mouth. They haven't fallen to the vest like on me. But the thing is, there's really when you first interact with someone, you're gonna have a couple takeaways. And I always think of three things I like to describe things. So when I first meet someone, if I'm in that world and I'm meeting this character for the first time, what the first three things I notice about that person? And then, getting a little bit more into the esoteric, there are things that you learn over time, unless someone's completely shallow, like say a Michael. Over time, you'll learn new things about them. There's depth to the character. And so what are the things that you start learning about this character? Like the character Michael was talking about earlier, who always had the chess piece. If you first meet them, you might not think much about it. You might not even remember the chess piece. But after the fourth or fifth time, you start to realize every time I see this guy, he has a chess piece. I'm pretty sure that a couple more times you go, yeah, really. Every time I see this guy, he's playing with a chess piece and it sticks with you. And that becomes part of that person to you. It builds into the pattern. So they kind of layer in over time. And, and sometimes you have to know people really well to get to the really deep stuff. But try to think of at least three more things that, like after you introduce the character, you can start filtering it in over time. Don't try to introduce your characters all at once in one big paragraph or in one chapter describing a new character. The days of Faulkner have long since passed.
Wow, I can't believe you squeezed a Faulkner reference in.
I've been looking for that for 206 episodes.
You've been waiting a while for that one,
Excuse me.
Going back to Indiana Jones, when we talk about visuals, it's like, immediately hat, whip, and like his physique. Like, there's an immediate visual. So and the thing that I have gotten into recently, and again, this is a writing style choice, this is something that I've been doing, is I've been describing my characters loosely so that there might be a distinguishing feature, but there is not a whole lot of super description, because I used to be very descriptive with my characters, and I tend not to do that as much anymore because I want the reader to apply what they think the character should look like. I want my spin on the character there, so I might describe their equipment or they have a mustache or particular small details, but not super specific.
And those things that also come up right away. It's like, how noticeable is it? And one of the things could also be like, they're very undistinguishable. There's like nothing really stands out, when I see this person, like average height, it's average Joe I'm talking to. There's nothing exceptional about him. And that would actually attract as much attention from someone as someone who has things about them. It's like, wow, this guy's like average build, brown hair, brown eyes. Wow, that's kind of boring. But that's going to stick out too. So they layer in.
But he stabs people wherever he goes, so he's kind of distinctive.
So the way to think about it is, it's like, how physical, how noticeable are these things? Because as you're introducing and dealing with characters, the more you meet the character, the more stuff you can leak out over time. You don't have to force it all out at once, because really in interactions you have with people, that's not the way you process. There's a great, I'll see if I can find it somewhere. I think I might have been in a great course, so it probably wouldn't work. They showed a picture of like a field with, it looked like it was in Denmark somewhere, with some flowers, a windmill, and some trees. And they take the picture down and they're like, okay, now most people believe they have a really good idea of what that picture looked like in their head, and they can describe it back to me. And then he showed another picture. He's like, can you tell me what's different in this picture? And it's almost the exact same picture. Some stuff has moved around a little bit. Some of the smaller details have disappeared. And you have to kind of see them flip back and forth before you go, oh yeah, that's not there. Oh yeah, that's not there. Oh, that's different. And you miss, we really don't remember the details as well as we think we do. And so the thing is, don't try and spoon feed a character up front. And remember, when you talk about a description of a character, it's not just what they look like. It's what they sound like. It's what they smell like. It's all of the senses. If they get touched at some point, touch will come in there. But
I will caution you though. Like, don't wait till page 100 to mention your lead character has a peg leg. You know, like
yes, that would be a highly noticeable thing.
Right. If it's something that's highly affecting and highly noticeable,
unless it's a world of peg leg people.
Well, fair enough. But my point is that you shouldn't drop like a really big weird thing super late in the game if it would have come up sooner.
Yep.
Because at that point, your reader has established what the character is in their mind, and now you're changing it.
For me, this is the most time-consuming part because you come up with stuff and then you have to reevaluate how noticeable things are. And to me, I kind of like to have the idea of literally ranked in order. This is the most noticeable to the least noticeable. And depending on how people meet, depending on the conditions that are going around. Like if you meet someone and they're in the foxhole next to you and you're in the middle of World War I, and it's the middle of a battle, you're only going to notice very obvious things. Like the guy was an idiot and stood up and started charging the enemy. You'll notice that.
He was wearing the same uniform and he had mud on his face.
Maybe. It depends on how close of the last shell was to you.
He had eyes.
I couldn't understand his voice because my ears were still ringing from the artillery shells, smashing into the ground around us. So conditions do play a part. It can affect that. But in general, just meeting someone, how noticeable are each of these things about this person? And really, you have to kind of repeat this until you can see the character in your head. We've talked about this with stories. You need to be able to visualize your plot. Especially for like your main characters, your main villains, your big support staff. I like to be able to visualize them in my head. It makes them seem real to me. It makes me feel like I start to use their voice when I'm interacting with them. And it really will save you time storytelling as well too. If you spend some good time here in step 4, that is the biggest thing is working until you can visualize your character and figure out how you meet them over time. And remember, this is not Guard 4 or Red Shirt 2 from the first Star Trek episode. These are for your more developed characters. You should not be spending this kind of time on those kind of characters. Those kind of characters, the way I plan them is I go, what's this character's purpose? Let me give them one thing to humanize them before I kill them.
Before I kill them,
you'll get the first 3 things you'll get with that character, and something we'll try and humanize to make them feel real before I slaughter them. Because I mean, my bad guys seem like bad people.
Number 5, use story action to define character.
Now, I use the word action here, and I probably shouldn't have because I don't necessarily mean like a sword fight to describe what an eloquent speaker you're. When I mean story action, I'm talking about literally any kind of action that takes place in a story, whether it's conversation,
action,
have the events of the story or anecdotes told in the story describe your character's character. If you want to like show that this is a very good person, have scenes set aside to do that.
Show me, don't tell me.
Once again, the exposition here is designed to create the scenes needed to tell the story about the characters, to help develop the characters. And you're doing this once again before you get to your plot or your climax, because at that point you're starting to get rid of stuff. But as you build up your climax, you need to add in either stories to talk about why a character has something, unless you want it to be mystery, like a mystery. And that's fine sometimes too. It's like, it took many years, I think, before with Wolverine they ever talked about the Weapon X project. Or the fact that he's apparently really old. And some of this because they made it up years later.
They didn't reveal that until
I think the 90s. Yeah.
I think
that late maybe.
Actually, yeah, I would say that you're right. The 90s. They revealed it in
the mid 90s, I think.
Yeah.
And he was around for, probably 25 years at that point. And now if you're writing a novel, you don't have that much time. But sometimes you want something to be a mystery about someone. Why do they have this trait? But then what you do is you take the trait that you want to be a mystery and you showcase that in the scenes. You don't give it through backstory. But if you give it through backstory, make it actual story things happening, either through conversation or through sword fighting or through puzzle solving or through... playing games, whatever it is.
I've said it before. I'm sure I'll say it again. Dawn Metcalf's first book, Luminous, has one of my all-time favorite characters, and it's not the lead character. And that's all I'll say. Read the book. The character, and I always try to be very vague because I've mentioned it before. I'm not saying the gender or the position of the character, but this character is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of the most satisfying characters that I've ever read. So
Awesome.
maybe one day I will make another character as cool as she made that one.
Yeah, and definitely one of the things I like with Michael, and maybe because he spent so many years like refining the skill as being a player in role playing games, but he does have an exceptional feel for characters, and what makes them work, and it's an art to it, Like I said, you need to kind of be able to visualize this as a whole being. Like I said, it's framework wise, so it's through the illusion that you're looking at them, but. They need to feel real, and it's the little details built into this framework of who they are. So, it's simple. It's 5 steps, strong archetypes, develop some quirks to round out and make it a unique feeling character with a good personality. Develop motivations, and remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a framework to work off of. You don't have to follow any actual science to it. Just kind of go, what are basic needs? What are psychological needs? What does this character look like self-actualized? And then be able to describe them out, obviously in words or in your head. You need to be able to visualize them in your head, from words that you create. And once you have that point, it's a very, very fleshed out character. And then use the story to convey that to the people who interact with them, whether it's an NPC at a game table, whether it is a character in a novel. Let the story that's happening or the game that's happening have the character teach who they are in the same way that you would learn if you met someone. And now, for the World Builder's task of the day.
Create a new character, follow our advice.
Mm-hmm.
Go through the 5 steps. Even if you've never, even if you're a seasoned pro, you're great at making characters, just try doing it a little differently, because I imagine your process may be different than the one that we've cataloged here.
Yeah. And then it's wrong. No, obviously it's not. I'm sorry, R.A. Salvatore. I'm sorry, Mr. Martin. You did it wrong if you didn't follow my instructions.
You are not a kind man.
Not today. I'm in kind of a snarky mood.
Doesn't surprise me.
Now, for the real world task of the day, use these same things and develop yourself as a character. Like, pretend like you're making yourself a character for your novel with whoever you are as the archetype. With your quirks, think about yourself. And do this exercise, be able to have a character that you could use in a novel based on you.
I've made a bunch of me characters. I mean, I am pretty awesome, so it's not surprising.
Yeah. Well, you modeled Indiana Jones after you, I believe, when you originally created him.
I'm trying to think. I think I have played in games, at least, I can think of 3 right off the top of my head. Like 3 me version characters.
Well, I could remember one specifically that had a very disturbing Nate interdiction on him.
What is it?
I don't want to go into it. It brings back painful memories for me. When you went to Nate and asked him to make sure that the character...
I forgot about that one. That wasn't even on purpose, but this is actually really cool. I am going to get a little specific because it's funny. We have a really good friend of ours, Nate, who is
great storyteller.
Great storyteller. Man, he's a fun GM, but he's also one of the most twisted-minded people in our friend circle, which is a compliment.
A statement. Yeah.
Like it's an absolute compliment. And I had accidentally created a character for his game, and I wasn't mindful in the creation. Like, that's something that's really important. That it's actually, we didn't touch on in this episode, but really is the crux of what we're talking about here, is to be mindful when you're creating a character. And I didn't do that. So I had created this character, and this character was being tied to the storylines of 2 other characters. So I just made it work. But then after we'd been playing for like I don't know, a couple of weeks, at least a few sessions, I realized that I almost modeled the character after me subconsciously. I didn't do it on purpose, but I realized that the character was really easy for me to play. And I'm like, this is not interesting enough. There's no built-in contradiction. There's no backstory conflict. This character's backstory is pretty easy. And the personality is pretty easy. I'm like, that's not interesting enough. That doesn't make it hard for me as a player, and doesn't make it interesting as a story. So I turned to Nate, and I said something very dangerous if you've ever played with him. There's probably 3 people in the audience that will understand the magnitude of this statement. But I turned to him and I said, Nate, please do to this character what you would do in real life if there were no consequences for your actions. And he went, oh, are you sure you want me to do that? And I'm like, yes, I do. I'm like, because the fallout is what I need to make this character more interesting. Like, I knew he would do something that would force me to change the personality of the character and to adjust based on circumstance. And boy, did he come through in spades. He did not disappoint as I expected he wouldn't.
Well, the irony is, the reason I remember that so well is I think it was in conversation with my wife that came up. Because this was actually in our first apartment together.
Yeah, this is going back quite a ways.
It's going back quite a ways, but it was like, the only doors inside the apartment were to bathrooms. The upstairs, everything else was essentially open air.
Wide open,
so
yeah.
there was
It was
the
an
bedroom
open
loft.
To lofted area.
So my wife remembered this. So that's funny.
Did she overhear me saying that to Nate? Mm-hmm. Like, she remembers me saying that?
Yes.
That's interesting. Because
and thinking, what a foolish thing. Yes.
No, it was exactly what I wanted. It was exactly what occurred was exactly what needed to occur.
Well, she meant foolish, and that's something she would never do. So
I am one of the rare types that I am willing to accept the consequences of my words.
Yes. And then he'll blame me for killing his character 20 times.
Let me think. No. Yeah, maybe 20, 25.
Well, per character, if we're going a per character basis.
I usually have a hand in it, though.
Yes. Oh, Jeff, you should really let me die. Oh, okay.
Yeah, would you just kill this guy and then the next one? You know
2 or
what
3.
It is? Do you know what it is? I'm a slave to story. Like, for me, and especially at a gaming table, and certainly with my own writing, I would rather the audience, and for me, as a player, the audience is everyone else at the table, including the GM. I would rather create a really memorable experience, even at the expense of my play and my character, to create a great moment for everyone that's everyone's going to remember. Here we are. We're literally talking 15 to 20 years ago, and we both remember that story very well.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's what I'm talking about. Same thing with like my books. Like my wife and I were talking about how horrible I can be to my characters and the cruel things that I can do. I think I mentioned this in one of the other episodes when I was talking about all of the characters that I'm killing around the main character. I'm like, just everyone. And she's like, "You killed the dog?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "I had to kill the dog."
That's the classic low point right there too. In American literature, killing dogs.
Absolutely.
That's as low as you can go. Well, sorry, killing like. I think that's as low as you can go in American literature.
No, I got some. There's worse. Like I don't mind mentioning.
Worse things happen, but I'm saying as archetypally speaking.
Yeah, I don't mind mentioning that because it's very early on in the story, so I'm not really.
There you go. But and also remember too, why do you have characters? It's not, and you can still love them, but remember they're tools
to abuse and murder.
That's right. They are tools for your story. It's a little different if you're at a role playing table. I mean, if you kill everyone every time they play a game with you, you're going to lose players. And that's sort of a problem on your end as a game master. But you also can't be afraid to kill people when it makes sense. And especially when it makes sense for the story being told. If they're fighting sloppy Town Guard 2 and the Town Guard rolls the crit and rolls the 2 on rolls the 2 on the 3d6 die roll and GURPS and plants the pike through the eye of one of the main characters. You got to give them a backdrop to get out of that, especially if it's really well made, but hey, at some points it's the games too, so just remember, have fun with them out there. But And really, Michael was correct. The 5 steps are really about being mindful, but in specific ways. And if you're mindful in the specific ways we listed above, I think it will really help you create great characters. And if you have other tips too, please be more than willing to share them with us. We'll always listen. And we usually are only mean to each other, so it's okay. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.